Fat shaming is a social practice of somewhat aggressive denouncement of lifestyle practices that may lead to one becoming overweight or obese. The subject is controversial because there are two main camps. One camp which thinks that fat shaming is an effective weight loss tool through a sort of cruel to be kind type adage, and the other camp which thinks that fat shaming is completely counterproductive because it fuels psychological harm, which, far from causing people to lose weight, can sometimes actually cause people to gain weight. So I'm going to critically evaluate both camps in this debate by looking at the scientific evidence, the literature. And by doing this, I'm going to look at all the available literature I can find that is relevant to this subject and critically evaluate it. Now, I'm no social scientist, so my own criticism isn't going to be perfect. However, what I will promise is that I will try my utmost hardest to keep my political views and motivations out of this. I will try and assess the literature objectively and using my own knowledge of methodology. To start, I just want to make it clear that this is not going to be an opportunity to discuss free speech, satire and comedy. Of course, this video exists because of the recent drama involving Nicole Arbour.
I can get away from you by walking at a reasonable pace.
However, while I have some quite strong beliefs on the nature of comedy, satire and the limit of humour, this is not a subject I want to go into. As far as this video is concerned, I really want to concentrate on the scientific evidence behind what Nicole Arbour is saying, rather than whether or not she should be allowed to say it, and whether people should be offended by what she's saying.
Tiny Tom is 15 stone and built like a brick privy. If he eats any more heartily, he will turn into a pie shop.
Nevertheless, this is an interesting conversation to be had in its own right. I'm going to start with a paper that's been referenced a lot in the media, of the title Perceived Weight Gain Discrimination and Obesity by C0nc0rdance and C0nc0rdance. And this paper is quite good because it addresses the question very directly. Let's have a look at a bunch of American adults and see whether those that have been fat shamed tend to lose weight more than those that haven't over a period of time. And lo and behold, I'm just going to read a little excerpt of this study. Participants who experienced weight gain discrimination were approximately 2.5 times more likely to become obese by follow-up, and participants who were obese at baseline were 3 times more likely to remain obese at follow-up than those who had not experienced such discrimination. So in other words, fat shaming not only can cause people to become obese, but those who are already obese can stay obese, and fat shaming is thought to be a contributing factor to that. So just from looking at this study, it seems that there's some evidence already that fat shaming, rather than causing people to lose weight, can actually have the opposite effect and can be dangerous in some ways. I'm going to be a little bit cautious though, because this is a longitudinal study, and there's nothing wrong with that methodologically, but longitudinal studies are somewhat more vulnerable to confounding variables. A longitudinal study looks at a load of different people and then looks at which ones have been fat shamed and how that's affected them. And they will also try and remove confounding variables. I mean, for example, you can imagine that social status influences whether people are overweight. And it could also be that people of a lower social status are more likely to be teased about their weight. So perhaps social status is the missing variable here, not fat shaming. And these sorts of papers will definitely try and control for these sorts of variables. And you can see in the abstract here that some variables are even listed, like sex and race and education. However, there's no sort of built-in mechanism that automatically controls for all these confounding variables in this sort of study. Unlike a randomized controlled trial which directly compares two groups, one of which has had the intervention or fat shaming and one that hasn't. So this is a sort of inferior design to the randomized controlled trial, which is why just by looking at this study one has to remain slightly skeptical of the results. It's nevertheless good evidence. But I will move on to some randomized controlled trials, because another benefit of these sorts of studies is that they also are pretty good at distinguishing cause and effect. Again, another problem with longitudinal studies is that you're not necessarily always sure whether it's actually the effect you're looking at rather than the cause. Perhaps being overweight causes the fat shaming rather than the other way around. So with that in mind, let's have a look at a few more randomised controlled trials. But just on what we've seen so far, it seems that the evidence for fat shaming being effective in weight loss is on very tenuous ground indeed. The next study is a huge randomised controlled trial called Public Relations to Obesity Health Campaigns by Pull et al. And this one looks at how people's self-efficacy and motivational type behaviour is influenced by campaigns of stigmatising or non-stigmatising behaviour. So essentially there were two groups, one which was looking at stigmatising campaigns, one which was looking at non-stigmatising campaigns, and then the groups were compared to see how people reacted to the non-stigmatising versus the stigmatising campaigns. And what it was found was that the stigmatising campaigns were no more motivational than the non-stigmatising campaigns. And in terms of the campaigns being able to promote a positive lifestyle change, or at least being able to promote a perceived lifestyle change in the minds of the subjects, the stigmatising campaigns were less effective than the non-stigmatising campaigns. So this study, which I think is a really good study in that it has a huge sample size and it has a very strong design, seems to present strong evidence that fat shaming does not work, or at least that fat shaming campaigns do not induce motivating type attitudes in their participants. The one weakness here, unfortunately, is that this study doesn't measure whether actual weight loss or weight gain, etc., occurred. So I guess it's conceivable that despite participants feeling like the stigmatising campaigns were less motivating, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are. However, when taking this with the longitudinal study, I think this hypothesis is pretty unlikely. And these two studies together present quite strong evidence in my eyes that fat shaming is not effective. That being said, I would prefer to see a study that actually addresses the weight loss question directly, rather than one that just looks at self-efficacy and psychological reactions to these campaigns. So this one is roughly in between the first two studies. It's a medium-sized randomised controlled trial, and it does address weight loss, although it doesn't directly address fat shaming. Rather, this study looks at different types of ways to manage weight loss and behavioural interventions. So this one is called Efficacy of Maintenance Treatment Approaches for Childhood Overweight, a randomised controlled trial by weightht et al. In the context of this video, the differences between the two different approaches behavioural management are not really that important. Neither of these approaches are stigmatising, so neither are considered anywhere near fat shaming. The only real important difference is that one is more geared towards or contains elements of acceptance, and the other doesn't so much. I think this is really the only useful distinguisher in the context of this video. That being said, the results show no difference really between the two interventions, or a marginal difference. Really, the only main difference is that when you apply both interventions, it's far more effective. So when you use both different types of management techniques, the effect is enhanced, albeit rather slightly. But that being said, compared to the control group that had nothing, that didn't have the behavioural management treatment, it's definitely effective. So this suggests that positive-based treatments that target the human psychology are definitely effective. And the differences between the approaches doesn't really seem to make that much of a difference, whether one is based more on acceptance and the other a little bit more on individual motivation. The difference seems to be negligible between those two. So I think what we can draw out of this is that positive based motivational based treatment approaches, perhaps even based on increasing one's self-esteem, are effective. Now this doesn't directly address the fat shaming question, but what it does say is that a positive approach is effective. So that might counter some of the claims of the people that say fat shaming is effective and a positive approach is ineffective. It doesn't seem to be true. This is not an ineffective approach. So the studies I've lifted so far are what I would consider to be either methodologically compelling or very close to answering the actual question: does fat shaming work? Does it lead to weight loss? Or probably more accurately, a compromise between the two. So in light of this, I'm just going to say that there are lots of other studies which I have listed here. The problem is, these studies I won't consider as methodologically strong as the large randomised controlled trial that I listed earlier. Many of these have quite small sample sizes, but additionally none of them really get quite close to answering the question. You can see that some studies address the positive role of behavioural intervention in weight loss on psychology. Some actually look at the physical effects, so some look at how behavioural management can actually lead to weight loss, and some look at the psychological disadvantages and vices of stigmatisation. But none of them actually look at the effect on weight loss of stigmatisation, the so-called Goldilocks zone. The closest one was that fairly large randomised controlled trial that I already gave. The thing to take away from these studies here is that they all basically roughly give the same picture, that neutral, non-stigmatising based behavioural intervention is effective, not just physically but also psychologically. It promotes good self-esteem and self-efficacy, and it probably does lead to weight loss, which is, if not large, it's statistically significant. With regards to stigmatisation, there's quite good evidence presented here that it can lead to rather poor psychological and mental health. It doesn't help your psychology in the slightest. I think the longitudinal studies give some cause to believe that it isn't effective in weight loss either. But the Goldilocks study that I want, the randomised controlled trial that looks specifically at stigmatising campaigns, non-stigmatising campaigns and a control group, and looks at whether weight loss results after and the magnitudes of each, whether or not it's statistically significant. That study, as far as I am aware, does not currently exist. So while I think the conclusion that I can make, and incidentally there is actually another longitudinal study that I haven't that I will list in the description that's very similar to the one I've already listed, that comes to roughly the same sorts of conclusions. So to conclude, does fat shaming work? Probably not. I think the evidence is quite strong, but I've talked about some of the limitations of the available literature, and I think the academic community could really make some strides in this area by doing some of the sorts of studies that I've suggested. So there are some limitations there, but on the whole, I think when taking the body of evidence, there seems to be a general consensus in what the studies are showing, and some of the stronger studies which all agree that it's probably a bad thing. We can probably conclude that it doesn't work. Okay, so just a few points to tie up with. Okay, so the issue that I think that we have can be expressed on this graph. We know that the neutral and positive type campaigns are very effective. The stigmatising campaigns are probably ineffective, but the evidence is weaker there. However, that's really all that we really do know. We don't have any idea what the sort of function curve looks like. It could be that slightly stigmatising campaigns are very effective, or they could be even worse than the fat shaming campaigns, or the more apathetic campaigns could be really bad, or they could be actually quite good. We don't actually know how this function works. All we know is that the neutral and somewhat positive campaigns are very effective, and the negative ones are probably ineffective, although I think the evidence is stronger for the neutral and slightly positive ones being effective than the negative ones being strongly ineffective. Of course, this all comes with the caveat that individuals are different. So these trials will be done on population. So these are sorts of average results. I mean, these results will be reported with averages and standard deviations. Not all individuals work in the same way. So it might work for some individuals, but I think there's take-home messages. For most individuals, it probably doesn't work. To finish off, I think we can pretty much put to bed the idea that it's an effective strategy. In order for someone to go along with it, I think there would have to be a lot more studies that contradict the evidence that's been provided, which I think is slightly conceivable given the holes that we currently have in this field, but probably very unlikely. But I want to just put one word of caution out, that the campaigns that go around sort of saying it's okay to be very overweight, it doesn't have health risks, or coming up with articles with perhaps slightly misleading titles saying that health risks have been greatly over-exaggerated, things like that. I think that could also be quite risky, and don't take this video to be an endorsement of sort of an apathetic attitude, which I think, given that we know that the positive and neutral ones do work better than the control groups, which probably do represent apathy, we know that apathy doesn't work either. So we do know that the middle part of the graph is probably better. But as for fat shaming, it probably doesn't work. I'm 80 to 90% certain of that. Not 100%. Probably doesn't work. Thank you for watching. I hope you took a lot from this video. This video was more inspired by some of Concordance's lit review, so I've tried to do it in somewhat of a similar style. I don't expect this video to be anywhere near as good as his, but check out Concordance's channel and subscribe. He does a lot of these sorts of videos on what things are effective in this field of mostly biology and biochemistry, drugs, things like that. Natural remedies, or are these things effective, that sort of thing. Concordance is really good at this sort of thing. So I hope this has gone really well. I put quite a lot of effort into this video, so please rate, comment, and tell me what you think, and thank you.